G'day guys, it's Stephen Simpson here from Sydney, Australia. I thought I'd just take a look back into the golden age of radio and talk about my favourite radio in Australian history in terms of complexity of cabinet design and performance combined. So, to give you a bit of analysis, Kriesler originally released a model called the 9MT in 1935, which was a grand console with 10 valve lineup, and it was advertised as the first Australian radio to have a fully metal valve lineup apart from its Magic Eye. In 1936 they made the successor to that, which was the Kriesler 280. It was a part of the Wonder Dial series, which came out from 1936 to 1937. This being the flagship of Kriesler, was featured in all of the adverts for Kriesler for 1936 and really heavily relied upon those adverts to sell them. You could have different classes of chassis put into this cabinet. This was the premium cabinet offered by Kriesler in 1936, and it had all the features associated with that cabinet and with the chassis being a 10 valve console. It had the full features of Kriesler sitting behind it as well, and gave you a really high-end console for what you were paying. So in 1936 it was advertised for £46 in Australia, and Kriesler's cheapest set in 1936 was the Kriesler 150, which is shown here. As you can see, it's a lot smaller. It's only a table model. It was a 5 valve set, which your standard sets were only 4 valves, and this had a 6-inch speaker compared to a standard 5-inch speaker. So this was more deluxe than any other standard set as well, but it was Kriesler's cheapest set at 15 guineas. So the console that we're looking at was 3 times the amount of the Kriesler 150. And you do see the Kriesler 150 come up from time to time, but they're extremely hard to get their hands on, especially in good condition. So you can imagine how hard it is to find one of these. This is the only known model to exist. We have not discovered another one known to exist. Somebody may have one sitting around somewhere, but they made very low cabinet numbers of them, or they made very low chassis numbers of them. This is chassis number 4. So in terms of Australian history, in terms of chassis numbers, you're lucky to find anything under 1,000. We made a lot of chassis over time, but being such a classic radio, they had very little orders on these. They would have been made to order almost, because they were such an expensive radio for their time. They would have been fill out an order form, have one in the showroom, and that's it. And you would order off that one. So this one would have been sitting in one of the showrooms at the time from an Australian radio seller, and featured there, and you would buy off of that radio realistically. And this is maybe one that didn't sell over time and eventually just got sold off, but a very original example of it, and in still very good condition. It's just been fully restored by me a couple of years back. So in 2018 I acquired it, and it's taken me 2 years almost to get it back to absolutely 100% pristine condition and into the working condition you see today. So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually broadcasting into the set. So I have an AM transmitter up there connected to my iPad, which is playing music, and it's transmitting that frequency at 1500 kilocycles, and the radio is picking up that signal like a normal station and reproducing it using the full potential of that circuitry. So I just want to go into a bit of the features that was offered with this radio, and in terms of performance and cabinetry. It was really the pinnacle of radio in terms of history, and really one of the first radios to come up like this, where it was as big a performance as the cabinet was. in the 37, 38, 39 era, they had a lot more potential in the chassis and a lot more performance put into the chassis compared to the cabinet design. Where in 1935, 1936, they were across the range. They were really fantastic cabinet designs, but didn't have the performance to match that cabinet design. And one that I particularly think of is the Astor Grand from 1935. It was a very, very grand console. It was very collectible today and very prized today, but unfortunately had such a grand cabinet, but it was only a 5-valve set. And that 5-valve set could realistically go into any of their cabinets, even a small little mantle radio, because that was the way it was designed. So you had this grand console, but you had only a mantle performance in there really. It didn't really have the full potential of valves in there that could really give you that full performance to match the cabinet, whereas this does have that performance. It's a 10-valve console, which is very, very rare in Australia. You don't see them ever come up. We're lucky to have a 5-valve set on a good day. Most of our sets are only 4 valves, and you don't see anything over 5-valve almost ever. So finding a 10-valve is very, very privileged and very hard to find, and they can get quite expensive. So I just want to go into a bit of the features of what was offered with this Kriesler 10-valve in the time. So in 1936, they released the Wonder Dial series, which was basically this dial, which is I think a 6 or an 8-inch dial, and you had this beautiful dial in here with concave dial cover sitting on it, or convex dial cover sitting on it, sorry, and then 3 plates of glass with this time scale in the center of it, showing a 24-hour day and night time scale, showing the time around the world. So you could see here, if it's sitting on 4 a.m. in New South Wales, you can see where it is around the world in terms of time frames. So it was a unique thing for that, and it was a bit of a gimmick. Absolutely it was. But then you also had the shortwave in the second dial there, so you can see there's shortwave. And then on the outer rim you have the broadcast with all the broadcast stations. As you go around, you can see all the broadcast stations. So it had 3 plates of glass, which was very unusual and very expensive, obviously, to have those prints made and printed onto that glass. The most basic version of it, which was the dial we see in the Kriesler 150, it's exactly the same dial, but it's only printed on 2 different bits of glass. Actually, it's printed on 1 bit of glass, sorry. It's only printed on 1 bit of glass, and it has colorized glass on this side and colorized glass on that side, so you can tell when you're on shortwave and when you're on broadcast. And this does the same thing. You can see there it's got yellow, and if I change across the shortwave dial will light up bright red. So it also had dual volume control. So this one's, in terms of radio talk, it's called a sensitivity pot. And then you have your main volume control. So it was quite a popular feature to have a sensitivity in the front end of the circuit, and then to have a separate volume control. So you can see the Magic Eye is adjusted via that sensitivity, and also by tuning as well. So when I hit the tuning, you can see it open and close as I come in on that signal. And then you have your volume control down here. So that's tuning, that's volume control. And then you have your band switch here, and you have a tone control on the side. So the tone control gives you a really, really drastic difference between full bass, which you can hear there. That's full bass, and then you can come up in treble to a really high pitched treble. So it's got a really fantastic tone control, and it's the best tone control I've ever heard in terms of a radio, in terms of range in that tone control, and in terms of selectivity in that volume control of where you'd like it to sit. And then in terms of the performance of the chassis, it's got a two-stage IF system, so it's not just a single-stage IF system, it's actually got a two-stage in there, which means that it has an extra coil in there. And it also has the RF stage in there as well. Being a 10 valve, it has an RF stage, then it has the oscillator, and then it has the aerial. So it has 3 different stages in there as well, plus the two-stage IF. And then it has a push-pull output system on as well, pushing 2 6F6s to really give you that maximum volume and maximum potential out of it, and a really, really big depth of sound that the radio can actually reproduce. In terms of cabinet design, it's quite unique in the fact that it actually has completely black painted sides, which was absolutely original, and I have the adverts to show that it originally did have black sides. Most Australian radios don't have a lot of black paint on them. It's very popular in America, but in Australia you don't get that so much. So finding a radio that has completely black painted sides is very rare, to contrast the beautiful walnut or Queensland walnut of Australia. So that's what the finish, or that's what the veneer is on the radio in most of its sections. So this is a cross-cut of the veneer, of the Queensland walnut veneer, and mirrored finish. So you can see that it's a mirrored cut. So you can see that it's identical on both sides. So it's been cut straight down the tree and then split in 2. So you get this beautiful finish across the top with this beautiful pinstripe, natural pinstripe, coming right down the center of the radio, all the way down into the speaker area, where it fades into the concave speaker grill. You then also have these beautiful features of African Macassar coming down the timbers there. So you have this beautiful inlay of African Macassar coming into the radio there, and then you have this beautiful concave speaker grill, which is obviously designed after the American Philco. I think it was a Philco Model X or something of that nature, which came out in the early 30s, which was a concave speaker grill with a couple of pillars sitting either side of it. Kriesler clearly took off of them and said, okay, well, let's do something similar to that, also featuring a completely black base with these 2 vertical timber sluts with Queensland walnut on them also, and this beautiful bit of featured timber down the side here, once again showing the beautiful Queensland walnut all the way down the side, with this beautiful routed edge running around the details of the radio, and this beautiful pillar coming all the way down to the black base. So it was a really beautiful cabinet design, and a very unique cabinet design, and very premium radio in its time. And you can really see that in the presentation of how the radio comes up, and if I get it into the right light, you can really see its full sort of potential there. So it's a really, really fascinating radio to have in my collection. I'm a technician, so I do service these, and to have something of this caliber is absolutely fantastic. Also, the radio is featured in the latest edition of Radio Waves, which is a Historical Radio Society of Australia's magazine. So it was featured on the front cover, which is a massive privilege for me, being only 26 and one of the youngest members in the HRSA, to have my radio featured on the front cover of their magazine, and to be able to have an article in there of the radio and how I got it, and the restoration and how the chassis came together, and all of that. So it does go into that detail. And then you can see in the back there, it's quite hard to see because there's no light in there, but I do apologise for that. But you can see that it's a very, very big chassis. It's a very, very big chassis. It's got a very big 10-inch speaker down the bottom there, which is powering it. It's got a field coil plus a choke plus the output transformer plus a big dropping resistor in it. So it's got, and it's also got 4 main electrolytics sitting in that circuit as well. So it's got a lot of filtering, it's got a lot of power there, and I can also give the valve lineup as well if people are interested. I'll publish that as well. But it's all written in the article anyway of what it actually is, and I can send that to anybody who wants it or whatever. But I just thought I'd give an analysis of the radio in terms of how grand it really was for its time, to show the real true golden age of radio, and to be able to listen to something like this and play the original music out of it with absolutely no modifications and in such clean quality of sound, to be able to transport back in time to that era. It's just fantastic, and I'll let it play for a couple of minutes here.
Say I love you on that you can rely.